So my name is Joe, and I'm a grateful believer in Jesus, and I'm living in freedom from alcohol. And first, I'd like to say Happy Veterans Day. And I think it's very fitting that I'm up here giving my testimony tonight. Now, when Pastor Lane asked me to share my testimony while holding the gong ballot, just kidding. My first thought was, I don't want to do it. I don't feel like it. I doubt anyone actually wants to hear what I have to say. I'm not ready. Yet here I am giving my testimony. Now, when I say the number 23, some of you might think of Michael Jordan. Maybe. Others might think that's the number of flavors in Dr. Pepper. I know Pastor Parker does. Many who follow Jesus think Psalm 23. And I'm going to discuss how only the first verse of that psalm brought clarity to the reason why I'm here today and why I put my faith and trust in God. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. So my journey begins on December 22nd, 1980. I was born in Seattle, Washington to Michael and Sharon Ferrari at Children's Hospital. I'm the youngest of three boys, Mike, Mark, and Joe. My childhood was relatively normal. I attended Maltby Elementary School where I became good friends with Brian. Now, Brian was odd by many standards. He was very skinny, wore an insulated hat with those little ear flaps that would come down, and he wore these big glasses. But we were best friends for a very long time. In fact, about halfway through college. But I'll get back to that. Now, when I was young, my dad worked really hard. He would drive an hour to and from work at Hormel in his Pacer. And for those who don't know what a Pacer is, here's a picture of one. There it is. Okay. Now, my dad's Pacer was not that nice, right? The brakes didn't work, the starter worked occasionally, and he'd often have to push start it. That vehicle was a junker. But my dad sacrificed his comfort to provide for us, always making sure our needs were met. So, Dad, thank you. However, this was the time of Nintendo, and I had wants, and I wanted a Nintendo. Now, my friend Brian didn't seem to have very many wants. Brian always had everything I wanted. He had a big house. His parents had a big house. A big TV, and when I say big, it was huge. Some of you might remember those big rear projection screen TVs. I mean, they needed their separate room just to be housed. Well, Brian had one of those, and he always had the latest video game system. He had the first home computer as well. We eventually did get some of those things, but Brian always had the latest, greatest, biggest, and fanciest. And I wanted all that and more. I wanted stuff. Now, moving into school years, elementary school was pretty good. I did pretty well. Learning wasn't that difficult. And in 5th grade, I found my calling, multiplication tables. Nerd. Me and my friend Travis would always compete to see who could do the most and the fastest. Our teacher was thrilled to watch us sit down and race through page after page. I was really good, but Travis, he would still beat me sometimes. So I practiced, I memorized, sharpened my skills until Travis didn't stand a chance. That feeling was awesome. What I wanted, well, I wanted to be the best. That continued throughout the years. Brian and I hung out all the time, getting into minor trouble now and again, but really nothing serious. In middle school, I started dating Meredith. It isn't like today's dating scene. Our dating consisted of holding hands together and rocking around the school every morning about 5 or 6 times, sort of like doing laps. Good times. In fact, I soon learned people would joke and count how many times we would make it around the school. So we did that through 6th and 7th grade until I abruptly ended it. I didn't like how people would joke about me and make fun of me. I wanted respect. My next short-lived adventure was band. In 6th grade, I started to play the trumpet. I joined the school band. I was pretty good at it, but I wasn't the best. You see, Holly, she was the first chair, and she was really good. But just like those multiplication tables, I wanted to be the best. So I practiced, memorized, and sharpened my skills. And we returned for 7th grade. Holly didn't stand a chance. The band teacher noticed my improvement, and shortly after starting the year, I was first chair. That feeling was awesome. Working hard and practicing paid off. By all measurements, I was the best. But he did one thing that would change that. Right before the beginning of 8th grade, my band teacher made a critical error. He called my parents and wanted to make sure that I was going to be in the band in 8th grade. Most of my close friends weren't in the band, and I wasn't able to hang out with them as much, playing Nintendo. I enjoyed band, but enjoyed hanging out with my friends more, and that phone call made the decision. Nobody tells Joe Ferrari what to do. You see, I wanted control. So I quit band, quit playing trumpet. Ninth grade rolled on by without much happening, and now we're getting into the driver's license time. I had my sights set on getting a 1967 Mercury Cougar. That was my dream car. You know, V8, hideaway headlights, a wide stance, a real muscle car. I would do the Tim Taylor grunt right now, but I wouldn't want to embarrass myself. And if you don't know who that is, just look him up. Any takers? No? Okay. Okay. So when I was getting close to 16, my dad's mom passed away. And he had told me when he got his inheritance that we would buy the Cougar and we'd fix it up together. And I was thrilled. Well, that dream was shattered when she left him $1 single and gave the rest to his brother. But that's a story for him to tell. Rather than dwell on that loss, we found a 1965 Mustang and decided to go that route. We found one, fixed it up, painted it. It was all ready to go, or so I thought. The final step came. We just had to get tires and wheels put on it and a wheel alignment. Then terrible news came. The shop reported that the subframe was cracked and bent, and there was no way to align it without some major overhaul. They estimated it was going to take about $2,000. And even then, there was no guarantees. I was devastated. There was no way I could afford to fix this. I wanted money. Then junior year of high school started, and I had a part-time job at a local grocery store, then at an auto parts store. I played baseball before, and of course, I wanted to be a pro baseball player, but those wants weren't realistic. I could either play baseball or get a job, and as I just said, I wanted money, so the choice was simple. This was the time when friends' parents would go out of town and trust their child not to have a party, and parents don't do that. There were parties every weekend, and that was where I was introduced to Coors Light, the silver bullet. Turns out that tagline makes perfect sense for my life. Want to shoot down your dreams? It will help with that. But it would take me many years before I'd realize it, because now I wanted alcohol. Now, drinking alcohol became the norm for almost any social interaction. Problem is, it was difficult to get at the time. But where there's a will, there's a way. And Joe Ferrari was that way. I worked with a guy at the grocery store named Jason. Jason liked his car very much and would often come to the auto parts store to buy things to make his Nissan Sentra look cooler. Not sure if that's possible, but I had a solution for both our problems. Jason would come in, grab all the things he'd want, and I would only ring him up for a portion of the items. All he'd have to do is buy me alcohol. Seemed like a pretty fair deal, and that worked for a while until he didn't need any more Al's Auto Supply upgrades. And so that mutually beneficial arrangement dissolved. But that didn't stop me. At this time, document scanners were coming into the market, so I picked one up and actually figured out how to make a fake ID. I was sure proud of myself and even managed to purchase a few cases of beer with it. Although that did work for a while, other friends had more reliable sources, so drinking now was a normal occurrence for me. Party on the weekends, school during the week. I wanted this to continue. And so it did continue. I graduated high school, was accepted at the University of Washington, and the party continued. Around this time, though, my drinking turned from a party to trying to reach that perfect level of drunkenness. That would get me to a level of being relaxed, having fun, and being the life of the party. The problem is, that's a moving target. And I always overshot. No pun intended. My choice of alcohol was no longer the silver bullet, but Crown Royal whiskey. When I couldn't afford that, it was 3-star vodka in a plastic container. I know, good high-quality stuff, right? So I was working 2 jobs to pay for college, rent, and now keep up with Brian, who didn't have to work and always had money. I just couldn't keep up, and at the end of my sophomore year, victory came. Not Jesus, but the United States Navy. The program I was introduced to was simple. I get paid to finish college and a little bit extra, and all I have to do is give them 5 years after college. Oh, and be on submarines. But all I heard was, you'll pay me, and I don't have to do anything right now. So let's do a little recap. I wanted stuff. The Navy would allow me to have stuff. I wanted to be the best. Less than 1% of 1% ever serve on submarines. And while I was in the Navy, we were frequently told that we are the best. I wanted respect. A military officer gets respect and more respect as they progress. I wanted control. A military officer has a lot of control, makes a lot of decisions, and gets more control as they progress. I wanted money. Not only are officers paid well, I was part of the elite submarine force and was guaranteed a bonus. And I wanted alcohol. And in my mind, the Navy went hand in hand. Although it's more discouraged now, responsible drinking is the expectation. I wasn't very responsible. So the Navy seemed like the perfect solution for me. So on July 26, 2001, I signed the paperwork at the Seattle Recruiting District building and committed to 5 years of submarine duty. This marked a shift in my behavior because respect and admiration followed. My cousin was in the Navy, and I noticed how proud my dad and mom and my brothers were of me. I moved out of that damp, overpriced basement I'd been living in into an apartment with my oldest brother. I stopped hanging out with Brian, and my drinking was significantly less. I was now in my undergraduate field, and I really focused on school in the future. I graduated college with a degree, and then went off to boot camp to be whipped into shape by Marine gunnery sergeants. Now, submarines and I worked well together. Remember how I wanted that Nintendo? Well, this was a real-life video game. Strategy, nuclear power, it was great. I did drink, but now it was a once-in-a-while occurrence. That is the way it went for about every year. I would take leave for about 2 weeks, and I would spend those entire 2 weeks intoxicated. After all, I had earned it, right? In 2006, I met my wife, and we were married in 2007, just before my final deployment, or so I thought. I was coming up on the 5 years, and I had to make a decision of whether to stay or get out of the Navy. So I made a couple critical life decisions at that point. I decided to stay in the Navy, and I decided to quit drinking. Now, from 2008 to 2017, I didn't have any alcohol. Pretty serious in that picture. So my life was going extremely well. I was moving up through the ranks, getting many awards and medals. I had 2 daughters now. Everything was under my control, which is what I wanted, and I thought I was in control at the time, but I wasn't. The problem, I was a ticking time bomb, waiting for an excuse to drink. I didn't have a safety net. I didn't have a support network. I thought I had friends, but in reality, they were only friends as long as it was beneficial to them. At the first sign of trouble, they all scattered and never spoke to me again, and trouble did come. In 2016, an accusation was made against me by a young female officer, which derailed the Joe's in control train. I was not in control. I was never in control. I immediately reverted back to 2007 Joe. That Joe never left, but was just waiting to come back out. I began to drink like I never stopped. Actually, it was a lot worse this time. My wife got a military protection order against me, and I lost everything. All the stuff, all the respect, all the money, all the being the best, all gone. But I did still have alcohol. My wife and I did reconcile, but it was never the same. And I spent over $100,000 fighting the charges. I managed to get an honorable discharge with full honors and benefits at exactly 20 years and 5 days of active duty. I retired, and despite being cleared of any wrongdoing, my job prospects were slim. Fortunately, God had a plan. And this is where Arkansas came calling with an opportunity at the Pine Bluff Paper Mill. And all I knew of Arkansas was Bill Clinton and country folk. Quite the resume, right? So I said, sure, I'll go to Arkansas. And things seemed like they were moving in the right direction. It seemed like a great opportunity, but after working there for a few months, that thought quickly vanished. I was being shuffled around from position to position, filling in places to sort out different issues due to the company's mismanagement. I wanted respect, but never received it. Just another cog in the machine. I wanted more, but those wants just seemed out of reach. I became depressed, and with nobody to turn to, I turned to the only thing I knew, alcohol. I convinced myself that this was just the way life was going to be. I told work that I would need some time off, so I drank and drank and drank for 2 weeks straight. No food, no water, just alcohol. And when my body finally had enough and I could barely walk, I didn't even know what day it was, and I had no idea when I was supposed to be back at work. Wow. Soon found out that I was supposed to have been back at work 4 days earlier and was terminated. No phone calls, no texts. I was of no use to them. So they moved on, and this was March 11th, 2023. I was broken, exhausted. I knew I needed something, but I didn't know where to turn. I fell to my knees in my driveway and I called out to God, begging him to help. God answered my call. I remember hearing about First North Little Rock. It was a 30 to 40-minute drive, but I felt compelled to go. I needed to check it out. On March 14th, 2023, I walked into the doors of Forever Free. It used to be called something else, but God always planned it to be Forever Free, so I'm just going to call it that from now on. So this church was nothing like the church I went to growing up. First NLR was exactly the church I was supposed to be at. Childhood church was what I knew, but never understood it. It was a small church. Everyone wore their nicest clothes. We sang from the book of hymns, but I always felt out of place. What it did do was plant that seed. I went to youth groups with friends, but I never knew what it meant to have a relationship with Jesus. I was a fan of Jesus, not a follower. I thought God was who you asked when you needed something. Whenever I would sober up from a drunken mess, I would always ask God to get me through the day, and that I was done drinking. That was going to be the last day I ever drank. Does that sound familiar? Well, despite knowing that I was a liar, God always got me through that day because God had a plan for me. I just needed to be willing to get off my path and get on his. On March 14th, I decided to follow Jesus. But I wrestled with one problem. I wanted to be the best, and I had convinced myself that I was smarter than everyone. The military reinforced that belief. You see, through all my schooling and training, I had a torn worldview. The Bible says one thing, the world says another. I had been indoctrinated into the world's view. Evolution, death before sin, millions and billions of years. You know, science says one thing. Bill Nye, the science guy, says there is no God. I mean, come on, it's Bill Nye, right? Well, the world was wrong. I sincerely asked God for one thing at that moment. I just wanted to believe. And I was about to drive home back up to Washington to visit, and I remember hearing about a book, The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel. I loaded up that audiobook, and I started to drive. I made it up to Washington, but all I could think about was driving home and finishing that book. Once the visit concluded, I hopped in my truck at 9 a.m. on a Monday, and I pressed play. Now, the Googles said it was going to take 27 hours to get back. While I don't recommend this, I just couldn't stop listening. I drove for 12 hours, only stopping for fuel and a potty break. That book was over, so I started the next book in the series, A Case for Heaven. And I continued to drive, and I was completely immersed. The evidence was clear, concise, and aligned. No holes, no gaps, just facts. I came to the realization I had been lied to my whole life. God was real, the Bible is his word, and his word is the truth. I wanted more. I'd made it back in time for Tuesday nights Forever Free. And not to boast, I've never missed a Tuesday since I started coming. Because it's just not an option. After listening to those books and finally believing, erasing all that nonsense that had polluted my mind, I was ready to exchange those worldly caller devices and only take orders from the only commander-in-chief, Jesus Christ. Amen. This was my tipping point, as Pastor Rod recently preached about. I started my journey on December 22nd, 1980, but I was born on March 11th, 2023. Amen. That is the day my life began. What I thought I wanted in life was in reality what the world told me I wanted. Truth is, I didn't know what I wanted. Ask a child what they want to be when they grow up, and it'll change day to day, hour by hour. Ask your significant other what they want for dinner, and stand by to hear, oh, you choose, knowing full well that whatever you choose, it will be wrong and not what they wanted. Don't fall for that trap. I knew that what I tried in the past was not going to work. I tried AA and other recovery programs, but they never worked for me. They were missing something. I loved to share at those meetings, tell everyone how stupid I was when I drink, get some laughs, have a few conversations, but it was always doomed to fail because I was doing it my way, the way I wanted. Remember I said I wanted control? Well, after attending AA and other recovery programs for about 2 to 3 months, and I would go every week, I would convince myself that I was good, cured, ready to take on all the challenges from before. See, I wanted to do life my way. I. There's one letter that will always derail my recovery. And you probably know what that is, I. Any sentence that starts with I, unless, of course, it's in share groups, is what got me to this point in the first place. I want this. I don't want that. I can do it on my own. I am the best. I cannot fail. Those are control sentences where I think I know what's the best course of action. After coming to Forever Free, I knew what needed to happen. The letter I needed to go. So my plan, every time someone suggests something to me, whatever my first thought was, I did the opposite. Pastor Lane says, keep coming back. First thought, I don't really like it here. Action, show up next week. Marsha says, it works if you work it. First thought, I've heard that before. It works if you work it. Action, show up every week. Get involved. Do the work. Greg says, we have a 6-week money back, or 6-week misery back guarantee. First thought is, I'll give you misery back. Okay, it doesn't really work, but you get the point. With a little effort, I could find a reason not to come back. But there has to be a better way. And there's good news. There is a way, and you'll find it in John 14:6. This is where my trajectory changed. I didn't know what I wanted. I didn't know what I needed. So I did what people with years of recovery recommended. And to quote the great Robert Johnson, whoa, baby. Remember all those wants? I didn't know what I wanted. I thought I did, but after coming here, what I wanted was Jesus. Psalm 23:1 says, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Now, the original read of that made me think that I couldn't want stuff, money, or respect, or a Nintendo. The way I read it now is, if I follow Jesus, he will show me what he wants for me. And frankly, all it has shown me is that my wants pale in comparison. I want what Jesus wants. For example, about 6 months after coming here, I was browsing Amazon, and up popped up a laser engraver. Keep in mind, at this point, I was unemployed, running up credit cards. No way I can afford this. So I walked away, and all I could think about was all the cool stuff I could make with it, and maybe make some money doing it. So back at the computer, I looked and started looking at the YouTubes for how to start a laser engraving business. Sounded like a lot of work, but Marcia says it works if you work it. Now that applies in recovery and in life. So I bought it, shot laser beams at everything, and then a couple of months go by, and Pastor Lane says they're starting Forever Free. So just for fun, I went up to him and asked, can I make some stuff for Forever Free? And he said yes, and that's where Forever Free merch was born. So how did I go from there to this stage? I started very simple. I showed up every Tuesday. I got involved. I got a sponsor. And most importantly, I didn't make any decisions based on my first thought. In one way, shape, or form, every person gets up here and says a lot of the same things. I would sit, listen, and sometimes just think, yeah, right. I'm not that bad. Or that sounds too hard. Or you don't know what I've done. Well, to that, I bring you good news. Matthew 11:28-30 says, come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. So Jesus is waiting with open arms. Okay. Sign me up. No, I'm kidding. All you have to do is show up, get involved, have a sponsor, and listen. Wait, listen? Another thing that I did, I didn't share in groups for the first 6 months. I kept my mouth shut and listened. Recall how at the other recovery meetings, I'd love to share how stupid I was? That was me trying to fit in, trying to be the center of attention. It didn't work before, and it wouldn't work now. Proverbs 17:28, even a fool who keeps silent is considered wise. When he closes his lips, he is deemed intelligent. James 1:19 says, this you know, my beloved brothers, let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. So if someone says, why don't you ever share it? Just tell them you're being biblical. Someone likely just said, I've been coming here, but I'm still having problems. This isn't working. I've had those thoughts. All right. I did eventually find a job after about a year and a half, but I was fired 7 months after I started. I thought I was doing everything right, but I tell you, the world is broken, it's fallen, and it will try to pull you back. But I have good news. John 16:33. One of the first things I ever engraved is hanging up next to my door as a reminder. I've told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. See, I believe the most consequential step is step 11, as Pastor Lane actually discussed just last week. Forever Free step 11 is we seek through prayer and meditation to develop an abiding relationship with Jesus, praying only for his will for us and the power to carry it out. It is not what I wanted that would improve my life. I had to surrender and find out what he wants for me. When I finally realized that what he wants for me is actually what I truly wanted in the first place, I knew that following him was the only way to live. The good news is you don't have to go back. You don't have to be defined by your past. When I feel overwhelmed, which I do a lot, you will find me here at Forever Free on Tuesday nights, Bible study fellowship on Wednesday nights, church on Saturday nights, church on Sunday mornings. This was me before. You can experience the same freedom I have, and many others have as well. Just keep coming back. It works if you work it, and don't forget, we have a 6-week misery back guarantee, and you can be forever free.